Ian, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another Red Cloud webinar. I hope everyone's keeping well. My name is Paul Lustrito. I'm the president of Red Cloud Securities, Inc. We're seeing a number of precious metal equities here reacting to the positive environment for gold over the course of the last 3 months, and especially as central banks around the world pump global liquidity into the system to combat the negative impact of this pandemic that we're going through. One of the companies that we believe is benefiting from the current gold environment is Northern Shield Resources. As the world has become a riskier place and investors have been flocking back to first world nations such as Canada, Australia, and the United States, we've been focused on names that we feel are going to add value in that part of the world. And in keeping with that theme, we highlight Northern Shield as a company focusing on early stage exploration here in Canada. I have with me on the call this afternoon, Mr. Ian Bliss, President and CEO of Northern Shield. Just briefly, the format of the webinar is as follows. I'm going to be asking a poll question on the chat line here for you to answer as we go through the presentation and provide the answer at the end of the Q&A session here. Ian will provide an introduction to Northern Shield, an overview of the project and what he's working on, kind of go through the investment thesis and the corporate vision for Northern Shield, and then we'll go to a Q&A session. I'd like to kind of go into the disclosure section of the preamble here. So there's going to be some forward-looking statements made on this call. I'd like to direct listeners to the cautionary notes contained within the corporate presentation located on the company's website. For Red Cloud Securities, I'd highlight that this webinar is for information purposes only and should not be considered a solicitation or purchase or to sell securities or recommendation to buy or sell securities. And we note that this call does not consider the particular situation or needs of individual investors. Participants should rely on their own investigations and seek their own professional advice before an investment. And to that end, we actually have research on our website on this name. Red Cloud Securities it has been in the last 12 months preceding this webinar been retained under a service advisory agreement by the issuer. So with that, I've put the poll question up to listeners onto the call. And like I said, I will be providing the answer to the poll question at the end of the Q&A session. And remember, you can download the presentation directly to your computer, either through the download files section of this webinar or from the company's website. I will now turn it over to Ian to update you on Northern Shield.
Thank you very much, Paolo, for that introduction, and thank you all for taking the time away from work today to take this presentation or make this part of your isolation process. Before I get on with my main part of my presentation, I do have to bring your attention to this forward-looking statement advisory, as this presentation will include forward-looking statements. For those of you who don't know Northern Shield very well, Northern Shield is known as a leader in generating high-quality, very early-stage projects utilizing what we call a model-driven approach. This background image really exemplifies our wheelhouse. This is our space, new ideas, large terrains with large-scale potential. And we are currently using our expertise and innovative approaches to exploration and that model-driven approach to become first movers on a low-sulfidation epithermal gold discovery and other related deposits in Atlantic Canada. We took our Short Rock property, which is one of the focuses of this presentation, from an idea to a drill discovery of high grade within 24 months. This feat has made me even more impressive when you consider that that system was not even known in the province of Nova Scotia prior to that discovery. So literally, we were starting from ground zero. And we're now at that stage where we're just about to begin what we think could be some beginning to define a resource at Short Rock. So as I said, our wheelhouse is really new terrains, big ideas, and this often in the past meant looking in very remote areas to meet these criteria. However, with the exploration dollars becoming harder and harder to secure, especially for early stage projects, we started to look for regions that still met that criteria of new ideas and large terrains, but in areas that weren't suffering from the remoteness and the high cost of exploration associated with that. And parts of Atlantic Canada really caught our attention. And our two flagship properties right now, Shot Rock in Nova Scotia and Root and Cellar in Newfoundland, meet those criteria. While Nova Scotia is probably the least explored of these two provinces, it has recently come under the spotlight with Atlantic Gold and its subsequent takeover by St. Barbara of Australia. So the Shot Rock property is only located about 10 or 20 kilometers away from the Atlantic Gold and Anaconda area, but this is in a completely different geological terrain. This geological formation, highlighted in yellow, both Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, is called the Avalon terrain, and literally no exploration has happened in these areas in both provinces over the years. Very little gold exploration. In fact, a few years ago, you'd be ridiculed for exploring in these areas. But this is where we found our Shot Rock and Root and Cellar discoveries. Many of you will be much more familiar with this slide than I am, so I'll not go into the great detail, but we are at the very early stage of a bona fide discovery as indicated by A, which represents a Shot Rock discovery. And I say this is a brand new discovery from absolute grassroots. And we can envision some very exciting times ahead as we begin to go forth with some of this resource definition drilling and sort of stepping out from the discovery hole we hit just a couple of weeks ago. Root and Cellar field is just behind that, represented by the star labeled B. But we hope to get the Root and Cellar project up to the same speed as Shot Rock by the end of the year. And certainly we consider these both flagship properties. But the drilling results at Shot Rock last week are really extremely exciting, and we think we can begin to move up that slope very, very quickly with further drilling. So just an introduction to Shot Rock. Northern Shield acquired the right to earn an 80% interest in Shot Rock from our prospector in 2017. And by the end of 2018, we discovered gold-bearing, low sulfidation epithermal quartz veins in outcrop within the property. So within 1 year, going from a concept to a discovery and outcrop. The whole property is about 300 square kilometers, but the main focus right now is in the central north portion of that property, outlined in that red box, in particular, the highway zone. The reason why it's called the highway zone, as you can see from the little photo in the top left-hand corner, is this discovery was made within a few hundred meters of the Trans-Canada Highway, and there's actually a railway on the other side of that discovery. So again, very little access, very little exploration in this area, but access does not get much better. So this is a summary of the highway zone and Shot Rock to date. The gold is hosted in what we call 4 fluid cells, highlighted by those white shaded areas. And these are identified by both geochemistry, sampling, and geophysics. So we have 4 of those fluid cells. The most prominent right now is the highway zone, followed by the middle zone. And we believe we have 3 other cells to the northeast, which would extend the strike length of this system to perhaps 6 kilometers. I say the system is located between the Trans-Canada Highway on the south, and just to the north of that line marking the 6 kilometers is another road and a railway line. And I say the weather here in Nova Scotia is not like in northern Quebec or northern Ontario, where you may get pushed out in the winter. There is year-round access to this project site, but a very large footprint overall. So far over about 3.5 kilometers, but we believe there are indications of further gold cells to the northeast, extending it to 6 kilometers. But the real focus of this presentation is going to be the highway zone there in the middle. Slightly better grades actually come from the middle zone, but the highway zone has the bigger footprint. So we've just completed, late last month, we announced the results from the very first drill program ever on the Shot Rock property. We drilled just 8 holes, totaling just over 2,000 meters. And because this was the first drill program at Shot Rock, it was not just to find the gold mineralization, but was to determine the geometry of these systems. These things are very complex. So it's the idea of determining the geometry of the system, identifying which structures, which faults are gold bearing, and validating the low sulfidation model that gold increases very significantly as a function of depth once you get into an area called the boiling zone. And that's very critical because these things, I say, they show very strong grade zonation from surface down to depth. And you can go from background levels of gold to high grade within a few tens of meters. And so we were trying to validate that model. As I said before, all the drilling took place on the highway zone, with 4 out of the 8 drill holes intersecting anomalous gold, and one of them, as you'll see, very significant gold grade. So say there's an outline. Some of the drill holes don't show up very well in the size of image, but the main one is hole number 4 from drilled in February. And so the next slide, you're going to be viewing it from the east, looking west towards drill hole number 4. And so the critical results from this drill hole, first of all, on surface, we had about 40 meters of just under 100 ppb gold, so low grade, but a very thick package. We saw that on surface, and that's what we wanted to sort of test out first and foremost. But much more critically, then at a depth of 136 meters down hole, we hit 3.15 meters of 4.2 gram per ton gold, including an intersection of 22 gram per ton. Just about 30 meters below that, we had a more significant intersection of 2.45 meters, averaging 12.6 grams per ton, including a 1 meter intersection of 17.3 gram per ton to gold. So again, one of the critical indications of this and validating the low sulfidation system is on surface, we only had a few hundred ppb gold, yet at a vertical depth of just over 112 meters, that's now transitioned into 22 gram per ton. So it validates our model that in these LSC systems, the gold is increasing very significantly on relatively shallow depths. Originally, our modeling on the geochemistry suggested that transition to high grade would happen at about 300 meters depth, but we're seeing it much more shallow at roughly 100 meters depth. So for the first drill program, these were extremely exciting results. As I say, these things are very complex, and to hit this type of mineralization within the first 8 drill holes tells me that there's a lot more down there to be found in the second phase. Other than simply finding the gold in the drill core, we gained a lot more useful information from this drill program. One of the things we noticed is that the host rocks to the mineralization are generally strongly magnetic. They're hosted in some of these gabbroic intrusions. But that magnetic signature is actually destructed or reduced based on the alteration associated with the gold mineralization. And so you can see on the map on the right, which is a magnetic image, the top is the gabbroic intrusion, which is basically pumping all these gold-bearing fluids around. And then there's a vertical gabbroic intrusion too, right down the center of that image. Those are all very sort of hot pink colors because they're strongly magnetic. But in between the gabbroic intrusions on the top of the page and that in the middle, you'll see it sort of drops off to an orange or a yellow. That means that the magnetite in that rock is being destroyed, and it's being destroyed as a result of the alteration that is associated with the gold mineralization. And we can actually see that in the drill core, and now we can step back and apply it to our airborne survey that we completed last year. And as I say, we see a very distinct area outlined in dark blue there of magnetite destructions, and that will be a target area in the phase 2 of drilling. Now, we also have a much better understanding of the orientation of the gold-bearing structures after the drill program. I say the area is very structurally convex, numerous faults. And the drill program was designed to test various faults and directions. And say now we have a very good understanding of the gold-bearing structures. We've isolated them. That dark dashed line in black in the middle by the red and yellow stars is the main gold-bearing structure. But you can see north of that, we have 5 other fault zones labeled 1 to 5 and indicated by the black dashed lines that are parallel to that system, and we think are likely will have carry gold as well. And you can see how most of them also correspond to that area where you're seeing that magnetite destruction circled in blue. Whereas the red and yellow stars, you can see, is right on the edge of that transition from the pink-purple colors of the highly magnetic stuff to the lower magnetic signature. And so that intersection of hole number 4 suggests to me that we're still right on the edge of the system. And so the fact that we still got 22 grams per ton is bodes very well to what we'll find just to the north. Again, one of the other critical ingredients that we picked up along the way is what we call pathfinders. There's certain elements, chemical elements that are associated with the gold. And these form distinct halos or shells around the gold mineralization. It's a little bit like peeling back an onion. And the image on the left is sort of a cross-section of 2 of those drill holes. And one of the key elements we see here is a mineral or an element called barite. And we see that forming a large halo around the gold-bearing fault zones. And then within that, we see other elements, including antimony and molybdenum and potassium, and they form, more concentric zones tighter to the mineralization. And we can use that as a vector during drilling. So now that we know that barium occurs as a shell and occurs more on the hanging wall or the upper side of the fault, we know if we see barium in the drill core that we're very close to the mineralized structure, but likely above it. And these other elements basically point us to where the gold should be in drilling. So an excellent tool, now that we know how tightly it's related to the gold-bearing structures, is an excellent tool to vector us towards where the gold-bearing structures are. Not only on a drill scale, but also on a property scale. The main map there, again, the pale blue outline is the barium, which is forms the biggest halo or the pathfinder, where the dark blues and reds are those that form closer to the gold mineralization. So you can certainly see that the barite anomaly sort of blows out over the highway zone. And that's one of the reasons we think that the highway zone is the place to be. It's certainly a very large footprint based on that barium anomaly. And so we use these pathfinders both as a vector towards drilling during the drilling phase, and it tells us there's a lot more targets out there that are worthy to explore. Because where you get barium with these other pathfinders, you probably have gold extremely close by. So this is now just sort of a conceptual model applied to what we know based on the geophysics and from drilling. And so you can see there in that middle of that block diagram, up in here, here's drill hole number 4 that intersected the high-grade gold mineralization. And yet up in here on surface, this is our area of magnetite destruction with very low magnetic signature. And we believe that represents areas of intense alteration. That intense alteration would then be linked to quartz veining and gold mineralization. And so this is the area here outlined in black, this black circle here, that we want to be targeting in the phase 2 of drilling. And we'll drill that from a variety of ways, but this is what we want to target, where the vein we hit in hole number 4 continues down to depth into that black circle. And that's also the area that shows a very low magnetic signature. And hence, we think it's where most of the veining and alteration is going to be. So this is going to be the target area for the upcoming drill program, or largely the target for the upcoming drill program, starting in a few months' time. So that's the conceptual model sort of applied to what we've learned from shock rock from the first phase of drilling. And it's very similar to the right-hand side as a classic model of a low sulfidation system, but you can slide that in and fit it very well into what we're seeing right now at Shot Rock. And so I say the main target area is about 200, 300 meters depth based on both our geometry of the fault zones and the signature of that magnetic anomaly. So this is really what we're going to be sort of focusing on and why we're so excited about Shot Rock, because there's a lot of faulting in this area and they all seem to funnel together and correspond to the area of a reduced magnetic signature, which we now know means alteration and hopefully gold mineralization. So moving on to our Root and Cellar property in Newfoundland, named for the root cellar that this portion of Newfoundland is so famous for. And so Root and Cellar, Northern Shield can earn 100% interest in the Root and Cellar property over a 4-year period. It's located on the Burren Peninsula of Newfoundland, only a 3-hour drive from St. John's. So again, access is excellent. It hosts several recently discovered high-grade epithermal gold occurrences, but there's also some very high-grade copper, up to 10.5% copper. And again, essentially all-season access. As you can see from the very far right-hand image, this is just a digital elevation model of the Burren Peninsula. And you can see the property sitting there in the middle. It's in a very distinct belt that cross-cuts the peninsula. And so it's telling us something right from the beginning, that something very geologically unique is occurring in the area of the Root and Cellar property that's different from the geology to the north and the south of the property. So I said the property hosts 4 distinct epithermal gold showings over about a 5-kilometer trend. On the west, you have the drop zone. Again, as you can see, some very high values of gold, up to 45 grams gold, 1,400 ppm silver. Then in the middle, the second principal showing is the Conquest zone, up to 47.9 gram per ton. And you have some smaller showings on the eastern end, Red Rock and the Braxton Bradley to the north. Now, out of these, only Braxton Bradley has seen any exploration by a junior mining company at all in the past, and all that accumulated to was 3 drill holes to a maximum depth of 50 meters, and they hit anomalous gold in all those drill holes. And it wasn't until after the fact that somebody came back and had a look at that core that they realized that this type of mineralization was low solidation epithermal gold. So again, it wasn't really known about in the area before. It's not very well known in Eastern Canada to begin with. And so that's the only showing on the whole property that has seen any exploration whatsoever. Everything else was discovered by a local prospector. So the main focus when we acquired this project was this epithermal gold, but there's also significant copper mineralization. You can see it here at Creston Copper in the south. It's actually, most of it was discovered in a quarry dug for road crush. And I say that the copper mineralization appears to have a copper porphyry affinity to it from what we've seen so far. And that's very interesting because copper porphyry and epithermal deposits are really end members of the same geological model. And we'll go into that a little bit more later. So looking at more detail into some of these, the drop zone, I say, is really characterized by very high silver and tellurium. We completed a soil sample over this showing last year, and outlined in light blue there, those are the silver tellurium anomalies up to 500 meters long, 4 or 5 stacked zones. So we seem to have, again, multiple parallel systems here. And I say one of the key ingredients that we identified at drop zone is a mineral called hessite. This is a silver telluride. And tellurides are often associated with epithermal systems that are very, very large and productive, including the Cripple Creek mine. So again, a very unusual mineral to see in Canada, especially Eastern Canada. But that mineral alone has not only caught our attention, but is beginning to catch the attention of many other people in the industry, because I say it's usually associated with some very large systems. Moving on to the Conquest Zone. Obviously, Conquest Zone has some very spectacular grades of gold up to 47.9 in channel samples in an outcrop discovered by this prospector. But what really struck me too was the abundance of low-grade material you see around the property too. You know, outcrop is not common, but almost every time you see outcrop, it is carrying anomalous to modest gold values. And I say that's as important as a high grade because it shows a very big and productive systems. Most big deposits have a large halo of lower grade. I say we completed a soil sample, sort of a pilot scale soil sample over the Conquest Zone last year too. And we've now defined a 1.4 kilometer long gold anomaly in soils that parallel and extend past that gold bearing showing. So it's certainly showing a very large system that we know today carries both high grade and abundance of low-grade material. And a lot of people that have seen this have suggested that this is very similar to some of the epithermal systems you get in Argentina, which again are very, very productive for both gold and silver mineralization. So I said there's also an indication of copper on the Root and Cellar property. I say we initially were really focusing on the gold, but the more I look at the data, I think the copper is becoming a very important component to the project. 70 samples collected by the prospector at Root and Cellar assayed over 0.1% copper, with 9 over 1%, and 3 samples over 5%, including 1 up to 10.4%. And say the mineralization appears to be of copper porphyry affinity. And the alteration on a recently completed airborne magnetic survey also strongly supports this possibility of a copper porphyry in the area. And as I said, copper porphyry and epithermal deposits are really end members of the same system. Copper porphyries typically form at depth. Here's your sort of granite intrusion, and typically your copper porphyries are going to form at the top of that, I say at some depth, whereas your epithermals are forming nearer surface in cooler environments, often on surface and often to one side of the system that's driving both the copper and the gold. So they are end members of the system. You don't often get them side by side because copper porphyries are much deeper than low sulfidation epithermal gold. But if you had a fault coming down here and then you brought this side closer to surface, you can actually get that copper porphyry sitting side by side an epithermal deposit. And that's what we think may have happened at Shot Rock. And certainly as we go forward this season in exploration, we're certainly going to be bearing that in mind. And so here's an example of a very high-grade bornite chalcopyrite-bearing boulder with a lot of epidote alteration. Again, a classic signature of a copper porphyry system. So I'll say the original focus was more on the gold, but we're rapidly beginning to come back and realize that the copper porphyry potential is very real. And so, one of the questions is, could Root and Cellar host both an epithermal gold system as well as a copper porphyry system? And obviously, if it does host a copper porphyry, that now brings in a whole host of other players that may not be interested in the gold aspect, but would be attracted by a large copper porphyry system. So we're definitely going to be chasing that potential during this season's exploration phase. So the next phase of exploration, say we're just completing the last sort of interpretation from the drilling at Shot Rock and beginning to think about going back and drilling. The drill is actually still on site at Shot Rock. So right now we're looking to do at least 8 to 10 holes, somewhere around 2,500 to 3,000 meter drill program, together with further surface sampling and mapping. Ideally, we'd like to start that drilling sometime probably mid-June, but obviously it's somewhat dependent on the restrictions of the COVID pandemic being lifted, where our personnel can be allowed into the province of Nova Scotia. Right now, we have to self-quarantine. But as soon as the restrictions have been somewhat lifted, we're very keen to get back and follow up on this initial drill program at Shot Rock. At Root and Cellar, we'll be starting on a very extensive 1,000 to 1,500 soil samples, probably starting within about 2 weeks' time. This will be occur contemporaneously with some mapping and rock sampling, with a focus on the copper porphyry, and then with some further ground geophysics after the soil samples and mapping have been compiled, so probably late summer, with the idea of getting that property drill ready by the fourth quarter of this year. Again, it's largely dependent on no more restrictions being imposed, but we'd very much like to get this property to the drilling phase by the end of this year and start testing out both the gold targets and the copper porphyry potential. So just a little bit of corporate data: 255 million shares outstanding, about 287 on the fully diluted basis, trading around 9 cents the past few days. Treasury sits at about 700,000 with a market cap of 22 million. So as I say, we did raise some money at the end of last year when things were somewhat tough, but we raised a little bit more than what we were looking for. And again, we had Rob McEwen come in early on this year as well, just to top that up. So the news of Shot Rock and the importance of what we discovered in the very first drill program is beginning to resonate, and we certainly look forward to getting back to drilling that as soon as we can. And so we just think Northern Shield represents a very unique opportunity to be involved in in the advancement of a new discovery in developing in a very underexplored gold district, and yet it's located right next to the Trans-Canada Highway. And these opportunities don't arise very often, so we think this certainly represents a very unique opportunity. So that concludes my presentation. So once again, thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to any.
Ian, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, excellent. So first question we've got on the line is from Billy. Billy's asking, is the ultimate goal here is to bring these two projects to production, or are you hoping for an acquisition?
We're really hoping for an acquisition. I mean, our expertise is in the exploration phase. We're not miners. I mean, of course, if it's big enough, you can go out and buy and develop that expertise. But our idea is to drill off resource, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of people willing to take this off our hands. So we're not producers at this stage. Our expertise is in exploring. Okay.
Next question is from Mario. Mario is asking, is Implats still a shareholder of Northern Shield?
Implats was never a shareholder of Northern Shield. They were joint venture partners on 2 projects, but they were never shareholders of Northern Shield.
Okay. So how can you kind of tell us the story of this is an interesting one. How do you came across the Shot Rock property?
Yeah, I met a prospector at PDAC who had a cobalt project, which was somewhat the flavor of the month. And we just finished our joint venture with South 32 on a nickel project in the Labrador Trough. So we're looking for new opportunities. So I went down to Nova Scotia to have a look at this cobalt project, thinking it may be associated with nickel, which cobalt can be. And when driving me back to Truro, the prospector asked me if I was interested in gold in Nova Scotia. I first said, no, I'm not, because I was figuring it was Maguma Group, which is what Nova Scotia is known for right now. And there's already a lot of people in that space. And those deposits tend to be small, though Atlantic Gold has proven everybody wrong since. But I originally said, no, I'm not interested in gold in Nova Scotia. But he started talking a little bit about the chemistry and what he'd been seeing, and I got to sort of be intrigued. So I said, okay, well, tell me more. Where is it? And tell me more about the geochemistry. And very quickly said, no, can't tell you more. My idea is so big. You know, you're come from Ottawa. Sorry, I don't really trust you. And why are you going to steal my idea? Because I haven't got the land stake. And they didn't tell me anymore. So I said, look, you know, you've got me intrigued now in gold in Nova Scotia. You're trying to sell this project that you don't really have. So let's try to get by this impasse. And so I told them, I handed over my Amex card, told them to go online that night, because in Nova Scotia, you can do online staking. And I told him to stake as much land in his name to protect himself, up to $5,000 worth, and come back to talk to me in the morning. And he was first very surprised that I was willing to hand over my Amex card, but I did so. No charges on Amazon the next morning. And within a few days, we had a dialogue going, and a few weeks later, we had an option deal. So it was actually, you know, kind of a great way of starting this whole project with, you know, based on trust and a two-way street. And, you know, Northern Shield saw a lot of him in Northern Shield and myself. I mean, we like to think outside the box and kind of go where no one else is looking. And that's exactly what he was doing. He wasn't just a prospector. He dug through the archives, found a lot of useful information that not a lot of other people had known about, and started piecing things together. And so, you know, we saw a lot of him in Northern Shield, and obviously the fact that we smelt the signature of a low sulfidation system right off the bat, which was not known in Nova Scotia. And so that really made us sit up and take notice and jump on the project quite quickly.
Awesome story. Another question here from Luke. Who are the major shareholders?
Our chairman holds, I'm not sure what he's up to right now, probably about 18 million. So he's about 7%. In the past, Tech is a shareholder, and maybe that's what the gentleman earlier on was referring to, was Tech, not Implats. They're probably down around 2.5% now. I'm not sure. Hot Bay has been a shareholder, and still is a shareholder, as far as I'm aware. So I think the biggest one right now is probably our chairman.
I'm sure this
a lot of it's friend and family. I mean, I started Northern Shield, 17 years ago, and so there's still a lot of friends and family that are still holding on to their shares. So it is quite tightly held.
A follow-up question. This is actually funny, so I'll mention it. Can I have your Amex card? I have gold projects in Florida. Okay, so next question is from Jim. Anything you'd like to add about the other properties in your portfolio that you didn't discuss today? And again, I take responsibility for that. I was trying to make sure that Ian was concise, because he's got a wealth of knowledge from a geological standpoint, and recognizing that, of course, if we go down the rabbit hole and from a geology standpoint, we could be here a while. But certainly, if you guys have in-depth questions on the geology front, certainly welcome to have that here in the Q&A session, but also to contact Ian directly. So over to you, Ian, about Jim's question.
Sorry, just repeat the question. Was that one about what other projects?
He was asking about anything you'd like to add about the other projects, because you have it in the appendices of the presentation that shows some of the other projects that you've got.
Yeah, we really have 4 other projects, 2 other epithermal gold projects in the Gaspé region of Quebec, which was acquired just over a year ago too. Again, we acquired these after we start to familiarize ourselves with the epithermal potential of the Maritimes and Atlantic Canada. One of these projects, Grandpa Boss, has stream sediment samples up to 100 grams per ton, and till samples with 14 grams per ton gold over 14.5 meters, where you actually still see the grains of gold stuck to little fragments of quartz vein. And people have gone up there, done a season of work here and there, but then run away because they didn't find the source. But I mean, obviously, there's a lot of gold in the soils that has not been identified. Another one that seems to be of epithermal affinity too, of 90 gram per ton gold. So these are obviously on the back burner compared to Shot Rock and Root and Cellar. And then we also have our nickel copper PG projects in the Labrador Trough of Quebec. And obviously with palladium prices moving right now, these are projects that we've always liked. They have been drilled, one season of drilling on both projects, but there's a lot of nickel copper PG flying around both projects. Edifix, I mean, we have indications of what we call globules or bubbles of massive sulfide and drill core running, 2 to 4% nickel, 1 to 3% copper, and up to 53 grams per ton palladium, as well as a reef setting of platinum palladium gold, sort of averaging 0.2 to 0.4 grams over 34 meters thickness over 7 kilometers. So these are projects that are really close to my heart, but it's an expensive area for us to work right now. So we hope to get back to them one day, either on our own or perhaps with an option partner, especially with the interest in PGEs estate, but still very substantial, essentially drill-ready projects for nickel copper PGEs.
And as a segue, next question. In 2016, Northern Shield attracted South 32 to one of your early stage projects in Quebec, even before you had any drilling. So 2 questions. Are you looking for a JV partner over at Shot Rock? And how are you so successful at attracting majors to such very early stage projects?
At this stage at Shot Rock, we're not particularly looking for a JV partner. I think, we feel confident with the data we see to date that we believe is more beneficial to the shareholders to try to get it to the next stage under our own guidance. Though we're always willing to listen to proposals, but at this stage we're not actually seeking a joint venture. To the second part, I guess, we bring a lot of science to the table with our projects. We're very early stage, and so we're not just a dot on the map and a geophysical anomaly. We bring a lot of science to the table, not only to reduce the risk for our own exploration for our shareholders, but at the end of the day, if you're looking for a joint venture, major companies look at a lot more than simply the assay data. So we bring that, particularly in the nickel PG background, which is what we're really known for in the past, but also with the epithermal gold, we bring a lot of science to the table, which they're going to be looking for at the end of the day. And again, we also look for these giant deposits thereafter. And a lot of people, everyone says they're looking for giant deposits, but then you got to make sure your geology supports that thesis, because it doesn't always. If you're looking for a giant nickel deposit, you got to make sure you have the plumbing system in place to substantiate that. So we pick these terrains that can support large deposits. And at the end of the day, too, majors, the reason why we're in the very early stage of exploration. They say we like totally new ideas, new terrains. And the major realize that if you're going to find a big deposit or near surface, this is the best place to do it. Go and look where no one's looked before. And so that's one of the reasons, too, that we attract the majors, is because we do sort of go well off the beaten track, but still in friendly jurisdictions. And they realize that there's potential for brand new discoveries and big discoveries when you look in these new areas.
Excellent answer. Next question. Capital structure looks a little heavy. Any plans on consolidating?
No plans at consolidating right now at all. The share count is admittedly higher than preferred for a company at our stage. However, we think that the number of outstanding warrants and option is quite modest, and so that will mitigate that concern somewhat. And historically, we resisted a consolidation because of the frequency with which other consolidations happen. You see the share price slip back very, very quickly to pre-consolidation price, and that worries me. And so we've never been able to, and at the same time, we've never been able to not complete a private placement despite our share structure the way it is. So we think, especially with the size potential of Shot Rock, let alone perhaps the sex at Root and Cellar, that these scale of deposits going to support a share structure of ours. So right now, no intentions of a rollback whatsoever.
Okay, you kind of already mentioned this, but someone's asking, you still hold the nickel copper PG properties in the Labrador Trough. You kind of addressed that already, that you do.
Yeah.
Okay. What type of news flow could investors expect over the next 3 to 6 months?
Well, the main news now is going to be, as I say, we're resuming drilling at Shot Rock. We're, I want to be careful about putting out a date, but hopefully sometime in June we can be back there. That's obviously dependent a lot on lifting the pandemic restrictions, and so that's going to be similar size, perhaps a little bit larger than the first phase of drilling. So the first news flow will be announcing that drill program. The major news flow will be announcing that program, and then results again depending sort of a month or two following that. They may come in batches this time. So the major news flow is announcing the drilling at Shot Rock, results from Shot Rock. We'll be on the ground in root and cellar within 2 weeks doing soil samples and prospecting and mapping, with the idea of getting to drilling by the fall, late fall, and a lot of other work in between that, the drill phase and soil sampling, mostly prospecting and geophysics. But it's really going to be driven by the drilling at Shot Rock.
Excellent. Me being the engineer that I am, and ex-analyst, can you talk to the access to power, permitting process in the province, access to rail and water and everything that you need in order to get a mine up and running?
Well, yeah, I mean, Shot Rock, as example by the picture, says excellent access. There's a road. The highway is within a few hundred meters, 1,000 meters maximum from the heart of it right now, but some of it's much closer. That highway is being twinned right now. Many of the hills surrounding the highway zone. In fact, we have one zone called the windmill zone because there's power generators sitting on top of these hills, and then power lines coming down. And then on the other side of that ridge is the railway line. So, access does not get much better than this. And very similar to root and cellar. You're right next to paved highways. We get out of the motel, we drive about 7 minutes, and we're in the center of the property. And root and cellar is right near Marystown Harbor, which is a deep water harbor and shipping construction. So, again, access and both for road and power and water is right there. Permitting, I say at this stage, it's relatively light compared to obviously mine development. That's a whole new set of rules and regulations coming down the road. Right now, obviously, we follow the drilling, which is filing for a permit. Government does its investigations, and those permits are applied, provided we abide by those environmental regulations. So obviously, it's very well governed by the province of Nova Scotia. We've seen in the case of Atlantic Gold, if you abide by these regulations, and they're very, very strict, but if you abide by them, the projects can go ahead.
Awesome. Okay, so there's no other questions on the line, but I will, as promised, go and end the poll here. So the poll question I put forward was, what do you like most about the Northern Shield story? And kind of three buckets: the high grade nature of it, the size potential, and or the location and access to infrastructure. So the 68% of respondents loved the grade potential at the project, and believe it or not, 31% talked to the size potential of the deposit model, and nobody talked to the location and infrastructure, which goes to show you that I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. All right, with that, I'll end the poll question. I'll double check to make sure there's no other. Oh, wait, there's a question here. Do you still intend to spin out the gold properties into a separate company? Is a question from Ted.
No, well, if anything, we may do is spin out the other project, spin out the nickel copper PG project. But the problem with spinning out a project right now, if you really want to spin it out into its fully trading entity, it's a $300,000 or $400,000 process and 4 to 5 to 6 months to spin that out entirely. So it's costly. Right now, these gold projects are Northern Shield story. We started years ago as a nickel story, but these have become the story. So if anything, one day we might spin out the nickel copper PG aspects, but there's a cost to that. Ideally, that's what I would like to do. But right now, there's not intention of spinning out anything that the gold stories are staying within Northern Shield. Who knows what happens down the road, but right now they are the story, and we're quite happy with that.
Yeah, you're more likely to make money for shareholders, see that money going into the ground.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. With that, Ian, thank you so much for the presentation. It was well done. Thank you, everyone on the line who are listening in. And like I said, Ian's done us a solid here in terms of keeping things light and airy. So if you really want to get into the meat and potatoes of the geology, I encourage you to contact him directly, because there's a whole wealth of knowledge between him and his team in the space. So with that, thank you very much, everyone. And thank you, Ian. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Paolo.